Hi guys, today I'm giving you instructions for how to get started with our watercolor painting assignment. To start today, we're just going to be experimenting with some different methods, and you can do this in a couple of different places. You could do this on the watercolor paper that I gave you, because that's exactly what it's for. Now, if you're going to do that on there, you're only allowed to use one piece. I gave you 3 pieces, and you're going to need 2 for the large assignment. So, 1 piece of paper, or you can do it on a page in your sketchbook. Now, if you're not sure which paper is the watercolor paper, that makes sense. The watercolor paper is the second largest. So the largest paper we have is the paper you did, I'm trying to make sure this all fits, is the paper you did your shoe drawing on. It's very tall. It's 12 by 18. Now, that one is very smooth, and that is drawing paper. That one we're going to set aside. The second largest paper that you have in your bag is watercolor paper. And we can't really see it in the video, but it's kind of textured. When we touch it, it's slightly bumpy. You can even see the bumps with your eyes. It's not showing up here in the video, but the watercolor paper is the second largest paper I gave you, and it is slightly textured. Now, you only want to use one if you are using this paper. If you want to do this in your sketchbook, you can. It's going to end up looking something like this. You need at least 8 rectangles. And in order to get those rectangles, you're going to take the playing card that I gave you in your set of drawing pencils, and you're just going to trace it again and again and again. So that's what I have done here on this piece of watercolor paper. I'm all ready to go. I have at least 8. I have 3 extras, and with these extras you can experiment, kind of play around a little bit more if you want. I need you to create 8 different things, and here's how you're going to label them. So take your playing card, trace, trace, trace. You're going to label them like this. You're going to try all these different methods today, and they are using alcohol, which is rubbing alcohol. I'll talk about that later. Salt, plastic wrap, sandpaper, dry brush, wet on wet, wax resist, and tape resist. So again, I will leave that there so you can see it. Alright, so then once you have all of those labeled, then you want to grab your supplies from around the house. Now, you should have a set of watercolor paints. That was on the initial list of supplies that I asked you to get before the trimester started. If you were not able to get them, I should have supplied them for you. Inside, if I gave them to you, it's probably a mess like this. That's okay. You should have at least 1 brush, maybe you have 2. And you're going to need some water, of course, because it's watercolor paint. So I actually happen to have 2 mugs of water. Some people will say when you are watercolor painting that it's really good to have one just for cleaning. And you shouldn't actually leave your paintbrushes sit in the water because it's bad for them. So this cup, this mug that I have is just for cleaning. This is the dirty water. Once I've cleaned my paintbrush, then I can use a paper towel or a tissue and kind of wipe it dry. And then I can get clean water from this one. And that way, these don't ever really wind up contaminated or too dirty. You can see that the red here is really kind of dirty. So what I want to do to clean that off is just put a little bit of clean water on it and then gently lift off that mess. Once I've lifted it off, then I can use my paper towel or my tissue to kind of get it clean, and then I do it again and again until I'm left with just the pure clean color underneath. So it's kind of a process, but you can see how I'm kind of mixing it up, making it a little bit dirty, and then removing that dirty mess. So it takes time, but you can clean off watercolors that have gotten messy over time. So there, it's more ready to go. Okay, so anyway, watercolors, brushes, water, and paper. Now we're pretty much ready to go, except you have these other things you need. These things like alcohol and salt and plastic wrap. So for alcohol, what I'm talking about is just regular rubbing alcohol. This is probably something you have in your medicine cabinet. Ask your parents. If you don't have it, it's all right, but you probably do. You also need salt, and we can use just regular table salt, or if you have coarse kosher salt, that will work really nicely. Kosher salt has large flakes, and so it will do a little more for us, but if you're just using regular table salt, that's fine. Any type of salt. You also need crayons or some sort of wax. There are my crayons. Any color you want. If you don't have crayons around, you just need wax. And so wax can be something like a candle. I also have birthday candles here. Or even one of these. Basically what you're going to do is draw with this wax on the paper. So it doesn't have to be a crayon, it just needs to be a chunk of wax. Next you need plastic wrap. And by plastic wrap, I mean, you know, that thing you've got in your kitchen. Just regular old, nothing fancy plastic wrap. If you don't have plastic wrap, you could get a little bit of plastic, clear plastic, or like an old shopping bag even would work. This is the bag that my soy sauce came in when I had takeout a couple weeks ago. I happen to have it still laying around, so there's just a little bit of clear plastic. It doesn't have to be the cling wrap. And then you need tape, and this was also on the list of supplies I asked you to get when before the trimester started. Painter's tape. Masking tape will work, it just doesn't peel off the paper as nicely, so you have to be kind of careful when you're peeling it off. But if you have blue painter's tape, that would be good, or maybe green, or really any colored painter's tape or frog tape will work. And then sandpaper, and you should have a little bit of sandpaper in your kit of drawing pencils that I gave you. Just a little bit of sandpaper, and we can use this when we are sharpening our blending stump. So if you've been drawing and using, here we go, your blending stump a lot, the sandpaper is meant to sort of rub against and sharpen it so that it doesn't always look like this, so that it kind of can be clean. But we're also going to use the sandpaper for a little bit of our watercolor work. So now we have all of our supplies, and what we're going to do is just jump in and try these things. So before I do that, I want to label them so that I don't forget what I need to do. And actually what I'm going to do is work on this one. Now if you want to work in your sketchbook, that's fine, but you want to make sure that it doesn't go on two pages that are back to back so that they don't make a mess on each other. And if you're working in your sketchbook, I would also suggest maybe taking a piece of paper, some random piece of paper, and just setting it underneath so that it doesn't totally bleed through and wreck the paper and wreck whatever you have underneath. If you're not working in your sketchbook, get a piece of newspaper, something to protect your table. You don't want to get watercolor and paint and rubbing alcohol all over your table. It will wipe up pretty easily, but if you lay something down, then you're protecting your space. It makes you clean up easier later on. I want to point out that with your watercolor paints, with this set, we keep these colors pure. We don't mix color right in here. If we're going to mix color and try to come up with different color combinations, we do that here. This is a paint palette, and that's why maybe if you have a borrowed pair, an old set of watercolors, this part is messy, because that's where you do your color mixing. So in order to get that clean, you just use a little bit of water and you dab it on there. You can kind of use your brush to do a little bit of the cleaning, but then get a tissue or a paper towel, and you can lift that paint off of there so that you're left with a clean space for color mixing. Not great, but I would do that again if I wanted to actually use that space. So here we go. Now I would also recommend having a tissue or a piece of paper towel with you as well, because you will be constantly drying your brush and reapplying paint to that brush. But you don't want to always have a brush that's wet, because when your brush is wet, it doesn't always give us the desired effect. So now again, if you want to work with these two different types of water, then just pay attention to keeping them clean. These are the other places that I've worked most recently. This is Minneapolis Public Schools, and a school called IHM, which was the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It was a little Catholic school. It's been a long time since I worked there, but they both gave me mugs, and I use them when I paint. So this one is for cleaning my brush. This one is for getting me clean water. And here we go. With your watercolor paints, with this set, we keep these colors pure. We don't mix color right in here. If we're going to mix color and try to come up with different color combinations, we do that here. This is a paint palette, and that's why maybe if you have a borrowed pair, an old set of watercolors, this part is messy because that's where you do your color mixing. So in order to get that clean, you just use a little bit of water and you dab it on there. You can kind of use your brush to do a little bit of the cleaning, but then get a tissue or a paper towel and you can lift that paint off of there so that you're left with a clean space for color mixing. Not great, but I would do that again if I wanted to actually use that space. So here we go. Now I would also recommend having a tissue or a piece of paper towel with you as well, because you will be constantly drying your brush and reapplying paint to that brush. But you don't want to always have a brush that's wet, because when your brush is wet, it doesn't always give us the desired effect. So now again, if you want to work with these two different types of water, then just pay attention to keeping them clean. These are the other places that I've worked most recently. This is Minneapolis Public Schools and a school called IHM, which was the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It was a little Catholic school. It's been a long time since I worked there, but they both gave me mugs and I use them when I paint. So this one is for cleaning my brush. This one is for getting me clean water. And here we go. Let's start actually with this technique of wet on wet. Wet on wet is a good starting point, because then you can apply wet on wet to any of these other ones and we can go from there. Now, wet on wet means that you start with wet paper. Oh no, it's my markers. My marker wasn't permanent. It says it's permanent, but I guess it's not. And I forgot to actually put something underneath this. Okay. Some of your sketchbooks have thicker paper than others,